Pearl Harbor was an event which will forever have a lasting impact on many families across the country of America. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a day which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by the naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. This was a statement made by President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressing the nation on the bombing which had happened the day before at the Pacific Naval Base located in Hawaii. Threats and actions made by both the U.S. and Japanese government greatly motivated Japan's plan to bomb Pearl Harbor. On the morning of the attack, the harbor looked like any other day. The majority of the military personnel either slept in or were away from the base for the day. Japan took advantage of this and planned the attack on a day where they would be caught off guard. On November 26th, the Japanese military took off from Japan with a variety of ships and tanks. As they approached the island, they turned off their radios so the signals would not be picked up. Soon, 183 planes took off from the aircraft carriers. Luckily, that day, all the U.S. aircraft carriers were on the East Coast. They used the code Tora Tora Tora, which meant tiger, to let others know that they have successfully entered the harbor without the U.S. suspecting anything. The motion of the attack first began at 7:55 a.m., and the most deaths occurred within the first 15 minutes. Japan used shallow water torpedoes as their main weapon. The attack ended around 9:45 a.m., and by the end, 129 Japanese and 2,400 Americans had died. An additional 1,178 were injured. Many Americans who died that day were on the USS Arizona. When Japan was planning, they thought the attack would make it so the United States could not retaliate for a long time, which would give them a chance to attack other countries and bases in Asia. But surprisingly, the United States was able to regroup relatively quickly. On December 8th of 1941, President FDR declared war on Japan, even though the goal was to stay out of the war for as long as possible because many parts of America were still recovering from World War I. 2 days later, Japan's allies, Italy and Germany, both declared war on the United States. Tensions between the two nations began all the way back in 1853 when Japan opened up to trade. They gained power quickly, but began to struggle economically in the 1930s. Their solution was to expand their nation to collect more resources, but then they came to a realization that it would be more beneficial to them to take control of the Pacific. Not many countries at the time were focused on Japan. Instead, they viewed Germany as the main threat, which was being controlled by Hitler at the time. Japan declared war on China in 1937, which quickly escalated. This led to them attacking China for a 6-week period called the Nanjing Massacre. This made the United States furious. By the end of 1940, Germany controlled the majority of France, Scandinavia, Central Europe, and Northern Africa. Japan and Germany were the dominant powers in the world at the time, but there was one thing in their way: the United States. As the war began to become more serious, many American citizens were unaware that there were tensions growing between Japan and the U.S. The U.S. also believed that if Japan was going to attack, it would be towards Singapore or Indochina. When Japan signed a pact with Germany and Italy in September of 1940, this made it clear that their next goal was to go after the United States. Throughout 1941, messages were going back and forth between Tokyo and Washington, D.C., trying to find a solution or at least a compromise, so Japan would not attack Indonesia. But in July of 1941, Japan attacked British Malaya for resources like tin, rubber, and rice. This led to President Roosevelt cutting off all trade with Japan. Suddenly, Japan attacked present-day Cambodia and Vietnam, which caused President Roosevelt to move the U.S. naval base to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, from its previous location in California. This was the final action that made Japan feel threatened. At this point, many knew that a war between the two nations was inevitable, but some wonder if it could have been prevented if we did not relocate the naval base.